Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Below the Line, the official podcast of the PSA Master Executive Council. Every time we push back from the gate, we're operating in one of the safest and most highly regulated industries in the world. But those regulations, safety initiatives, and policies don't happen by accident. They're shaped by people who are willing to advocate for our profession and the flying public. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on how that work gets done. From the halls of Congress to meetings with federal regulators, ALPA pilots and professional staff are working every day to advance aviation safety, protect pilot careers, and ensure our voices are heard where decisions are being made. In this episode, we're joined by Captain Ren Babcock, PSA's MEC Vice Chair, along with Adam Melis from ALPA Government Affairs, to discuss the issues shaping our profession and the critical role pilots play in influencing the future of aviation. We'll talk about ALPA's legislative priorities, the push for enhanced safety technology, the impact of ALPA-PAC, and most importantly, how every pilot can help strengthen our collective voice. Thank you for joining us today. Make sure and subscribe to the channel wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss a new episode. Let's get ready and go. Below the Line.
Hello again, everybody. Welcome back to Below the Line. Whenever we first started this podcast series, our primary goal was to bring you information about the behind-the-scenes activities within your Master Executive Council. And today's topic takes us really, really deep behind that curtain. It's covering our Government Affairs Committee and their work behind the scenes to help to shape what comes out of Washington that affects you as an everyday line pilot. Joining us today is Captain Ren Babcock and Adam Melis from ALPA National. Gentlemen, welcome to Below the Line.
Thanks. Good to be here, Josh. Thanks for hosting.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to have both of you. So today we're going to have a little bit of a roundtable discussion, a lot of the focus on the national priorities as well as the recent legislative summit that happened up in D.C. I believe it was the beginning of June. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. It was June 1st through 3rd.
Fantastic. Well, Ren, kind of jumping in directly with you, why don't you tell us a little bit about your career as a line pilot, kind of how you got involved with the MAC's Government Affairs Committee, and kind of what sparked your transition from strictly on the flight deck to more of that advocacy role?
Sure. Well, I've been at PSA for 4.5 years. This is actually a second career for me. I did have a little bit of government affairs involvement in my previous career. I got involved with ALPA when the first officer representative for Charlotte position became open. I actually just ran for the position. I tried to volunteer a little bit, but didn't really hear back. I filled the form out once or twice. So I kind of got thrown right into the fire. As far as advocacy, I really just got an email about the legislative summit. I thought it looked interesting, so I sent something to our former MEC chair, Kurt, and asked if I could go. And he was able to get me on the attendee list, and this is the third year in a row that I've been to the legislative summit, so it's been a good experience for me.
So we'll circle back to summit here in just a second. Kind of more from your perspective, more from the MEC role. Can you tell us how government affairs works within ALPA, just from the MEC level, kind of with you all, and then working up towards national?
Sure. Well, aviation, as you know, is highly regulated, so it's important to have a strong voice in Washington. Pretty much everything that we do, from labor issues to safety in the flight deck to how well ATC works, all of this is connected to government. So from my perspective, it's very important for ALPA to have a strong government affairs team. The way this kind of works through from like lower level to upper level is that ALPA is going to set policy at the board of directors. There's a meeting every other year. There's a strategic plan that is worked on during that meeting. And then basically that kind of sets guidance for the government affairs team to do their job. It's going to set like policy and guidance. I'll give you an example real quick. It came up that I think there was like a bill or something that was going to maybe water down the sim training that we get. And one of the policies that we set at the board of directors was that we want to maximize the amount of full motion sim training that we get, obviously for safety. So that's just an example of one issue that came up that we have the government affairs team essentially working on.
So kind of circling back to Summit here for just a little while. Everybody probably got an email a few weeks ago, shortly after Summit, with a picture of everybody in front of Capitol Hill. Can you kind of explain what all the 2026 Legislative Summit was about and kind of what all goes on during that event?
Sure. So the Legislative Summit is a once a year event that ALPA hosts, and it's kind of like the big dance. Basically, it's the event that we are able to get the most pilot advocates to Capitol Hill to speak directly to legislators and their staff. So the way the summit works, once a year we go up to DC. There's essentially 2 days of training where you're going to get briefings on issues. You're going to hear from speakers. You're going to hear from subject matter experts. And that kind of brings all the pilots fully up to speed on where things are legislatively, what needs to get done, what are priorities. And then the final day of the summit is actually I don't know if we call it Capitol Hill Day, but all the pilots go to the Hill. I think there's basically a consultant team that schedules meetings for the attendees to meet with, if they're a constituent, they meet with their legislators. So for me, I'm from North Carolina, so I was placed in the North Carolina group, and we had a team of people that went to the Hill to meet with legislators from North Carolina so we could speak directly to them about the priorities that we wanted to talk about from the summit.
So that's actually pretty interesting. Walk us through a little bit of what it's actually like for you just being a normal pilot, everyday pilot, and you're basically walking into the members of Congress and speaking with them and their staff. How do lawmakers usually respond when they're hearing directly from somebody who flies every single day?
I think hearing from people that fly every day and that do this job is extremely important for legislators. I think we're very well received on the Hill. And for a line pilot to go into this, one thing to keep in mind is the program that ALPA has set up is really good to get you trained and prepared to go and meet with these lawmakers. So you'll have background information. You'll actually have a one-on-one training session where you get to sort of practice your pitch, essentially, so that when you actually do go to the Hill and meet with legislators, you're prepared and you're informed.
Yeah, and if I could just sort of echo on what Ren said, one of the great advantages of Legislative Summit is not just that there are pilots who are, talking about aviation safety, but there are pilots who actually do the work that you guys and your members are doing. Once talked to a candidate for Congress who was a former Piedmont pilot, and he said, Adam, there are a lot of pilots in Congress, but only a couple know what a 4-day trip is. And I think that in its own is really a big value driver. I'm talking about what you guys see when you're flying a plane versus what some GA pilot might see.
So I know we've got pilots that obviously are in Congress, but I don't know of any 121 pilots. Kind of sufficient to say that most of them probably don't know the everyday struggles and, we're going to take a 4-day trip and junior man into a 5-day. I dare say none of them kind of know that struggle.
I would say 100%. I often talk to guys like, oh, I'm a pilot and I do all this stuff. I said, great. Tell me what it's like to have 60 to 160 strangers behind you when you're flying. And they're like, oh, yeah, I guess you guys do something a little bit different. And I'm like,
Yeah. So kind of shifting gears here just a little bit. Obviously, since 5342, there's been a really big push in mandating ADSB technology. From a pilot's perspective, Ren, this is really more geared towards you. So from your perspective, is having, I guess, full traffic awareness just mainly beyond TCAS and stuff like that, why is that really a game changer for safety from your perspective? And the second part of this, more from a legislative standpoint, what pitch are you making to lawmakers whenever you guys are up at Summit lobbying for this stuff?
Sure. Well, the pitch this year was really mostly about ADSBN. And this really hits home for PSA pilots. With the completion of the NTSB investigation into 5342, ADSB was one of the recommendations they had. There was quite a few recommendations that the NTSB made about this accident, but ADSB is one of them. It's important to explain to lawmakers that this is a response to this accident. We've looked at all the factors that caused it, and ADSB is a technology that's available now. It's a better technology that gives better awareness. I'm not sure if all pilots are aware of this, but TCAS really does have some limitations. It's an older technology. It was designed in the 90s. It was pre-GPS technology. ADSB has a much higher refresh rate. It has much better data. Has much, I don't know, more precise. And it actually works all the way to the ground, right? So TCAS turns off its resolution advisories, right? When you get below about 1,500 feet, those resolution advisories actually turn off because TCAS is just an old technology. It's not precise enough to support that kind of awareness all the way down to the ground. So we've identified ADSB as a technology that's here now. It's being delivered in new airliners. Most aircraft already have ADSB out, but we don't have ADSB in. So in our airliner, in our CRJ, we don't have a complete picture of traffic. So that was really the big pitch this year. There's two bills right now that are in response to 5342. I believe it's the Senate Rotor Act and the House Alert Act. The Senate Rotor Act has full ADSB in. Compliance is mandatory. The House Act did not. And our job really is to explain what this technology does and explain why we feel it's necessary to have it mandated in aircraft.
So, Adam, I guess kind of from your perspective, and I guess more from a national scale, because these issues affect more than just us here at PSA. We all get the emails asking us to complete calls for actions for different bills that may be working through the House and the Senate. How are you all determining those legislative priorities and kind of prioritizing what needs to be worked through first?
Yeah, so a couple of things. First of all, one, Ren had talked about how policy is developed. The board and the ALPA president, they really give our team the marching orders. And then we work with the Engineering Air Safety Department directly and with those pilots who are involved in the ASO to not only who are part of the investigation process, but we're also part of the recommendations and really sort of come together to sort of say, okay, what does this mean for all of our carriers, and what does it mean for safety in general? Having something that is safety related. We're going up there, pilots in different uniforms flying for different carriers. It really demonstrates sort of not just the importance of the issue, but the importance of the issue to the industry itself. And I think on the national perspective, for me personally, when I, think back on my days of meeting with constituent groups or leading other constituent groups, having a bunch of professionals come in and just flat out say, here's what would have added, what could be additional 50 seconds to our reaction time, that's telling. And being able to talk about near miss experiences that either you experienced or some of your peers have experienced, those things are, members of Congress have no clue about this stuff. And again, being the professional who's up there in the cockpit, flying the line, being able to talk about these things from that perspective, and for do it from multiple airlines, that's real power. So you touched on the emails as well. We have a robust call to action email system. That's just another way for members of Congress to hear from their constituents. We had 170 pilots come to Congress for during Summit, but there are 535 members of the House and Senate, and so our best way for us to connect with all of them is to connect with all ALPA members at once. So it works. I know from talking to offices and when they're looking at these issues, like, oh yeah, we had this pilot from North Carolina come in to talk to us. Did we hear from any other pilots from North Carolina? And you say, oh yeah, we heard from another 20. Again, it just matters.
Well, back to one thing that Adam had mentioned is one of the things that came out of the NTSB report was that had we had ADSB in technology, they sort of actually ran a simulation of what this would look like if ADSB in was installed and functioning. And the CRJ crew would have gotten a warning, I believe, 59 seconds prior to impact. And then we also, for the summit, we had some images generated for us of what the traffic awareness display looks like with TCAS and what you just see a simple dot on a map, right? And then, or on a range ring, not even a map. And then what the ADSB in display would look like. And you can see, it's kind of a moving map. You can see the DCA airport. You can see the helicopter, the direction and speed it's moving. So there's a lot of additional information that ADSB in brings. And that was, I think, a key part of what the NTSB's recommendation was. And it's why we are focused on ensuring that it gets added into whatever package of laws is passed as a result of the investigation.
And those images came directly from the NTSB report, which, being able to source something like that just adds to it.
So Ren, kind of tell us, for the average ALPA member, specifically at PSA, who kind of wants to help in this endeavor, what are the most effective and realistic steps that they can take either at a local or a district level? So really diving into their representation in both houses. What's the steps that they can take to get involved and kind of help affect change?
Sure. Well, I'll actually leave part of that question for Adam. I'm sure he'll want to jump in, but the PAC is very important. The ALPA Political Action Committee. It's very easy to join. You can join with the ALPA app. We'd really like to get participation increased. Currently, we're sitting at about 15% of pilots participating. Other properties, Delta, I think they're probably around 50%. So we'd love to increase those numbers. The other thing is completing the calls to action and reading the ALPA emails. And when there's a call to action in there, complete that. Also, there's ways to volunteer as far as the Legislative Affairs Committee. And I think we're going to be seeking a few. I need to talk to the chair, but I think we're going to be seeking a few new volunteers to go to the summit next year. Adam, anything to add?
Yeah, no, and I think this is a great question, and it's one that we get often from line pilots who look at some of the things that we're doing and want to get involved, and certainly getting to know your member of Congress and getting to become familiar with those issues. ALPA, we run a program that we call the District Advocate Program. Where there's some online training modules that will help connect you with some resources and skills that we look at helping folks understand what it is to get to know some of the issues we're working on, but also how do you communicate those to your member of Congress locally. The other sort of thing is, and Ren mentioned, contributing to ALPA-PAC. I can tell you right now, there are a lot of line pilots on your property that probably were never even asked to contribute to ALPA-PAC. And, if you're a supporter of ALPA-PAC, and you're somebody who wants to help increase the profile of it, you can just talk to the guy sitting right next to you while you're working and just say, hey, I know I don't only talk about politics on the flight deck, but let me tell you about, what ALPA's working on. And that's certainly, very important, because a lot of the issues we're working on are not what would be called traditional partisan issues, but they're pilot partisan issues. And that's how we really operate our government affairs program, not just the PAC, but everything else. That we knew, we're here because of the pilots, and we want to be driven, want to make sure the pilots know that we're doing these things, for the benefit of them.
So Adam, kind of shifting mainly to you here, and I'm going to skip a couple of questions that we have on the notes here, because we've really kind of covered them with some of the other sections here. Can you kind of give me ALPA's top legislative and regulatory priorities right now, really outside of the Alert Act and the Rotor Act? I know those are really big right now, but what else are you all focusing on, and how does your team prioritize those?
Yeah, so that's really a great question. So there are a number of issues that are sort of what I would call perennial issues, where they may pop up, they may not pop up, sort of where we have to sort of keep a watchful eye on and play defense. There are others that we've been very proactive in helping find bill sponsors, and been able to identify what essentially is known as a legislative vehicle, where those bills, which are much smaller, can be attached on and ultimately moved into law. On sort of that side of things, where it's not the perennial, sort of the more recent side of things, the funding for the National Mediation Board, that was one of those where the agency was set to be cut significantly. We were able to preserve funding levels and actually increase it. We're optimistic that based off of potential new members to those agencies, that we may be able to protect the funding, not just for the rest of this year, but into future budget years, because of the effectiveness of those boards. We've also begun working on a bill that's known as Overtime for All. As some of you, most of your listeners may know, that there was one of the campaign promises President Trump made was to get tax deductions on overtime work paid. Unfortunately, the way pilots earn their overtime, it didn't qualify. And so we working very hard to find bill sponsors, both in the House and Senate. And we have very good bipartisan bill sponsors on this, to sort of get, so the next time tax legislation is done, a way to sort of expand that overtime, so that unexpected 5-day trip, you suddenly are getting, be able to deduct some of that payoff of that. And then, sort of the more perennial items. It goes without saying that one of our highest priorities is and will continue to always be making sure that there are 2 pilots on the flight deck at all times. This is a non-starter issue for 99.99% of the U.S. Congress. There's a couple of members of Congress who think that it's okay to experiment with these kinds of things, and even though there's no intent to do it, we have zero tolerance on experimenting with it, and so we sort of made sure that we work hard to keep that standard, not just in the United States, but also overseas. And then, we got a whole bunch of other issues that you can find on the ALPA website if you go to the Advocacy tab. I can certainly go on for hours, but I think this podcast would be more for insomnia than information.
Any comments, Adam, on ATC modernization and where that stands?
Yeah, that's great. So during the previous year, there was a bill commonly known as the Big Beautiful Bill. There was money put into that legislation to begin the process on ATC modernization. We have been working very hard to continue to add to the appropriations on the ATC modernization effort. We also look to make sure that there's appropriations for the FFDO program. But on the ATC side of things, we are part of a coalition that includes pretty much every organization within aviation to help make sure that funding continues. ALPA President Jason Ambrosi is in regular contact with Secretary of Transportation Sean Duffy to see what we can do to help the effort along. And it is certainly a priority of the Department of Transportation that this gets done. It's just one of those things where we just need to continue to fight to make sure that the funding is there to finish the job.
So you used a phrase earlier. You used the term pilot partisan. Can you kind of explain what you meant by that, and really why that's important to what you all do within governmental affairs?
So ALPA has very much focused on being pilot partisan even before I started with ALPA. And it basically, what it is looks at how are we going to approach our efforts to lobby and influence Congress, and how are we going to engage in elections with the Political Action Committee. and do it in a way that not only communicates to those legislators that we're doing it in a nonpartisan way, but we're doing it and communicating it also to ALPA members. We do everything because it is pilot partisan, and that means the candidates that we choose to support, the elections that we choose to engage in, we make sure that we're doing it not because we like somebody or not because we like a political party, but because it's being done because it's good for the pilots. And my day-to-day job is to help advise the ALPA-PAC steering committee on candidates to support. And I often try to explain to them and others, when it comes to electing members of the House of Representatives, the letter next to that candidate's name has pretty much been decided for 90+% of the congressional districts. So, it's our job to sort of make sure that we're looking at these candidates and say, okay, well, who's the best candidate with that letter next to their name? Who's the candidate who's going to look at NMB funding or look at the Federal Flight Deck Officer Program, or, go down the list of all of our issues and say, okay, this is the candidate who's going to understand the issue the best. And we're going to make sure that we, are supporting that candidate to be elected, or, better yet, we're going to do everything we can to keep that member of Congress in office, because when it came to voting for aviation safety over, what the party leadership wanted, they chose the right route, which is the safety route. That is certainly, a good example of why we do things in a pilot partisan way. But it's tough because, a lot of people have very closely held political beliefs, and, I certainly, we respect those folks' beliefs. We don't make endorsements on congressional candidates because of that. But we do look at these things and say, okay, is this person going to, be able to be elected? Is this person going to, if elected, be able to, understand the depth of what our pilots are trying to tell them, and understand that we're not going in there with our hand out because, we want, all we can get out of the government, but we're going in there with our hats on to say, this is what safety is, and this is what it means for us to be able to do our job in a safe environment, in a way that, will continue to be a safe environment. And I think that's a really, I think that's probably one of the better ways to explain what pilot partisanship means.
So, shifting topics just a little bit, let's talk a little bit about the PAC. It recently just passed its 50th year in existence. And I'm just kind of wondering, can you tell us what the PAC directly supports in your line of work? And I'll have a follow-up to that, but if you want to answer that first.
Yeah, so 50 years ago, a lot of political action committees were being formed. I'll try not to be too technical in it, but essentially, if an individual decides they're going to run for Congress, they have like two ways to do it. One way is they self-fund their campaign. And the other way is to raise money from individuals and political action committees and other potential supporter bases to help, get their message across. And to run for Congress in most places, it can cost anywhere between $1 million to $6 million in a House seat. I know from talking to the two main Senate candidates in North Carolina, they're both planning to spend $200 million. I don't know about you guys, but I don't have that kind of money to burn. And so, if I were to run for office and I never plan on doing it, it would really require, sort of engaging in constituents and constituency groups that may agree with me on some of my issues. And so, in that sense, the political action committees were formed as a way for labor unions, associations, corporations, and others to really sort of go out there and say, okay, we are going to gather resources as a singular group and help promote candidates that we feel are good for our industry or our business or our union. Now, what that means is, what that means is we're going to, raise money from pilots, and use that money to directly support the election of a candidate, or help that candidate win election. By law, as well as by ALPA administrative policy, this has to be done through voluntary contributions. Not 1 cent of your dues money is being used to get somebody elected to office. And I think that's important to point out because, pilots spend a good chunk of money in dues and suddenly we're asking for more money. I don't know. Well, I mean, your dues money is going to support a lot of other things that are also much more important to your union's ability to succeed. And we want to make sure that if you're doing something in a political sense, that you're doing it, we're doing it in a transparent way. And so that's why we have the policy, but also that's why the law is in place. Now, what it means for the Government Affairs Department and pilot advocates, what it means is we have a tool that allows us to help build a relationship with a candidate. I know Ren has a relationship with a congressman in North Carolina, Brad Knott. They've known each other a long time. He's somebody that ALPA-PAC has also supports. We've built a relationship with his office. With him, that's not just with one singular pilot, but with the entire organization, and we do this by attending PAC events or going on a PAC retreat, where it's not something that's sort of in the official capacity of someone being a member of Congress, but it's more in the capacity of how can I get to know my constituents or the people who represent my constituents? And, it's a lot different when, you're going into a room with somebody and they're like, hey, I want to talk to you about this issue. And your first question is, okay, well, who are you? Versus going into a room with somebody who says, hey, I want to talk to you about this issue. And like, oh, I see you're from the airline pilots. Oh, I know, these pilots and I can connect with you on these things. That it's a very different conversation. And that's where the PAC can come in, 'cause it can help us build those connections, not just in Washington, but also in the district itself.
So, Adam, you made a really good point, and that's that every dollar that goes into the PAC is a voluntary contribution from the pilot. And most pilots are fairly money savvy and would like to know that they're getting a good return on the money that they're investing into the PAC. Do you have any type of mechanisms that monitor or maybe can shift funds from one representative to another that may be a little bit more pilot friendly? Uh, you know, we hear all the time politicians will make campaign promises, but not necessarily follow through on those. Do you have a mechanism in place to monitor and basically kind of like a tripwire if something is starting to go wrong?
Yeah, I think that's a spectacular question, and let me put it in a couple of ways. So, um, and obviously, a lot of PSA pilots were probably hired after 2020 or 2021, but those pilots who were working on property during those years where where flight demand had reduced significantly, ALPA was able to fight for the payroll support program, that made sure that if any money was from the federal government was given to the airlines for a bailout, that money would go directly to employee compensation. This was the only industry that got anything remotely like this in the history of the United States. And it had bipartisan support, both the House and the Senate on both sides of the aisle during the first CARES Act, the second CARES Act, and the American Recovery Act. That those were supported bipartisanly in the first two for sure, because we had split government for those. Legislation had to be signed by President Trump. It had to get through a divided Congress. And it's because of the relationships that we're able to build, we're able to get those kinds of bipartisan results. On the other side of it, we can talk about, some safety legislation as well, where we're able to get bipartisan support in a significant way. Now, the other sort of side of this, the ROI questions, or the mechanism of how we evaluate. We spend a lot of time, my colleagues who do a lot of the direct lobbying, they spend a lot of time on the official side, meaning that they're going into the congressional office to talk policy, to talk about bills. And we sort of evaluate as things go. And part of what I do is I prepare a budget for the ALPA-PAC steering committee, which is made up of 9 pilots from different carriers, to sort of evaluate who we're going to give money to, plan to give money to. And those pilots, they let it be known if somebody they feel is no longer deserving support from PAC dollars. They let it be known how they feel about it. And then what we do is we evaluate, is there a consistency in these actions? There's a member of Congress from, I'll just say he's from California, but there are plenty from other states as well, where, my colleagues have spent hours and hours trying to get them on the right side of ALPA issues, to the point where, they just are like, okay, you know what? We're going to keep trying, but we don't need to attend any political events, because obviously all they want to do is give us lip service. Now we make these evaluations in sort of this sort of informal way, but we also do it in a formal way by saying, okay, does this pilot or this member of Congress, how are they engaging with our members? How are they engaging with our our issues? Now, does that mean that I'm looking at vote totals and whether or not people signed letters as a part of an evaluation? No, we don't, because that's illegal. But what we do is we look at trends, and we look at whether or not a member of Congress is willing to meet with our members during legislative summit or back in the district. We look at some of the statements that they make about some of the issues that we're working on. And we really then, use that to evaluate, okay, is this person going to be, someone we want to build a relationship, can we build a relationship, or are they actually one of our champions, where they're going out of their way to, do what's right for our members. And those can be identified with trends.
So I think we all kind of learn best from direct examples. So I'm going to ask kind of a direct question here. Do you have any examples of any activities that have happened as a result of the PAC, or maybe professional lobbying, or maybe pilot grassroots efforts, and kind of the effect that has had on your all's legislative priorities, or maybe pushing something through the finish line?
Yeah, so there's Congressman from Georgia, Brian Jack. He represents Peachtree City, among other parts of Atlanta. He was a candidate running to fill an open seat last time around. Obviously, there are a lot of pilots who live in Peachtree City, not just 125 for Delta, but other airlines as well. And, we reached out to him, he reached out to us, and we began the process of sort of interviewing him, evaluating his campaign, whether or not he was somebody that we were going to be able to build a relationship with, whether or not he was somebody who would be willing to talk to us about policy versus, just partisan, here I am, I'm a Republican and we should support me, kind of point of view. We decided to support his election to Congress. We did in a significant way. Of course, just because we did that didn't mean that we were going to get anything more than a handshake and a thank you. But as we move forward into the Congress and the suspension vote on the Rotor Act was coming up, a constituent of Congressman Jack's reached out to him and said, "Hey, we really want your vote on this today. Will you please do this?" And he actually had a few constituents reach out to him that way. And, when it came down to the final vote, he voted for safety over what the party leadership asked him to do, what Secretary Hegseth asked him to do directly, and others. And, we, we're not giving him money because we knew he was going to do this. We gave him money because we knew he was going to represent a lot of pilots. And we knew that he was going to, be in a position where he could listen to a lot of pilots. And in that sense, it certainly started a positive relationship where we're, able to, open the door because, we supported a campaign. We were able to open a door because there were a lot of constituents who were able to talk to him. And at the end of the day, we got the policy result that we wanted with his vote on the suspension vote on the Rotor Act on the House floor. That's one example. This year at Legislative Summit, we had Congressman Bresnahan, Congresswoman Val Hoyle. Bresnahan's from Pennsylvania, Val Hoyle's from Oregon. Both of them were supporters of the amendment to the Alert Act that not only was ALPA pushing, but the PSA families were pushing. And again, these are, two individuals where we've been able to build relationships because of the PAC. We were able to connect with them grassroots wise, not just with pilot members, but also with, the families. And we were able to, get the policy results that we're looking for. That's, we continue to do things these ways.
Well, that's certainly a pretty good case study and kind of effective movements that can occur really without you all even having much direction, even from national, just more from a grassroots effort, kind of the impact that can make. I'm going to kind of kick this back to both of you. So if you want to tag team these questions together, that's fine. And then we'll close out a little bit. But kind of looking ahead, what's one issue or development that really concerns you or excites you for the future of how pilot advocacy works?
I can take that first. So, one thing I will just say is that if the ADSB in language does not get adopted in the final bill, we're gonna have to continue to push it until it is. But on sort of the pilot engagement side of things, one thing that I think is super important is that you both are, doing a lot of great work for your MEC, that your replacements are being identified and that we have more regional pilots able to talk on the issues and talk about their experience as pilots. Ren talks about making sure that there's some more new folks coming to Summit next year. Absolutely. This the future of, not just the future of ALPA, it's the future of aviation. It's the future of aviation advocacy.
So Ren, really from your position within the MEC, what are you guys looking for? What's your goals when it comes to this committee?
We want to see the committee fully staffed, and we want to see people that are able to go to the legislative summit a few years in a row. For me, that was something that was really important. It's the third time I've been. I, kind of had to get spooled up on all the issues, but by the time it came to Capitol Hill Day, I was ready to go. I was meeting with people I'd met with before. Adam mentioned I had a relationship with Brad Knott. I didn't get to meet with him this year. I actually moved to a different district, but I got to meet with my new congressman's staff, and that meeting went really well. But just keeping the summit, this committee, like fully staffed is definitely going to be a priority. I also wanted to touch, just before we close, a little bit on the pilot partisan issue. That is something to me that when I first became involved, it just sounded like a corny catchphrase, but as I've gotten, involved with the program, I understand that there's a lot more to it than just a catchphrase. It really is about being credible when either pilot advocates or our professional lobbying staff meet with members of Congress and their staff. It means that we are there to talk about issues that affect our pilots and the traveling public, whether it be safety or workplace things. And they know that when they hear from us that they're hearing about issues that affect pilots. They're not hearing anything about other politics. We're just here to talk about pilots. So I thought that was something that I've come to appreciate.
Yeah, I think I agree with you 100%. It is a corny catchphrase, but it's a corny catchphrase that really explains a complicated, way to operate. So,
Well, gentlemen, just kind of a moment of transparency here. Honestly, I was sitting down looking at the notes for this podcast session, and I kind of had to question myself, like, do I have a good understanding of this? And I'll be honest, at the time I didn't. So talking with both of you all has kind of clarified it even for me. So thank you for that.
Yeah, Adam gives a good presentation at the summit every year about, how we need to maintain our credibility, because the power in Congress and in our government flips all the time. So we need to make sure that we are here talking about pilot issues and maintain bipartisan credibility so that we can get things done even when government is divided. And I think we have a good track record of that.
So I know ALPA really likes the calls to action. From your all standpoint, what single action would you encourage every ALPA member, not just here at PSA, but every ALPA member across the world to take right now or sometime this year to strengthen their voice in Washington?
Well, I think I would say join the PAC. I mean, that's a very easy thing to do, and it does it makes a big difference. And as Adam mentioned, the key with the Political Action Committee is that the funds can be used in a different way because it's an individual contribution. So we understand that pilots pay dues. Dues money can be used for certain things, and then the PAC money can be used for certain things. So it's important to maintain a healthy balance, and I think that increasing participation in the PAC is easy, and it really it's not a whole lot of money. There are a lot of options if you go, and the best way to join is the ALPA app. So, Adam, anything?
yeah, I would say, joining the PAC, I think you were pretty spot on there. The other thing is when you respond to the calls to action, there's a little indicator that says that you responded to it. Just making sure that you have them all checked off all the time. Or if one of them's not checked off, you've at least looked at it to say, okay, this is an issue I agree with. This is an issue that's important. Let me make sure it's checked off.
Fantastic. So final thoughts here. This is for either of you or both of you. For a pilot listening today, where would they need to go to stay informed, to kind of respond to those calls to action, learn more about the PAC, or just get involved in general?
Adam, I'll let you answer that one.
Okay. Yeah. So, look, communicating with folks is so difficult these days. There's so many things coming at you. Your LEC and MEC newsletters are always very useful. The weekly fast read that ALPA National puts out will have content that's relevant and timely, and important. And I just found out the other day that there's a podcast version of the fast read that comes out. So if you're like me, you don't like to read anything, you can listen to it. But, the more you're involved with ALPA, if you become a district advocate, you're going to get a district advocate newsletter that outlines some of the things that we're working on. We do regular district advocate phone calls. And really those items are certainly things that can help people learn more about what we're doing in government affairs. But yeah, I mean, look, everybody's time is precious, and is there one go-to place? The ALPA app certainly is one of those places. But there are definitely others.
Well, you mentioned the ALPA podcast, just a really cheap plug for them here. I would say that undoubtedly their production value is 10 times better than what we're producing here. So if you haven't had a chance, make sure that you go over and check them out on their channel as well.
Yeah, it's good stuff. I will say though, having conversations like this that, you and Ren and me have been having, it's important because, when you're having these conversations with your peers, you're coming at it with the same perspective that they may be coming at it. So, that's another place to do it. Just spreading, word of mouth is always a good place too.
Fantastic. Well, guys, that's everything that I've got for today. Thank you very much for joining us and providing some very useful insight into the government affairs, kind of what it is that you all do. But aside from that, why it's important for each of us to understand what you all do. I know we don't necessarily all have to align politically speaking, but we can definitely come together as professionals within that capacity and agree that some stuff's just better for us than others. And it doesn't necessarily take a political party to support that. So thank you guys for explaining what it is that you all do and how each pilot out there can get involved to help better support your all's cause. So thank you.
Thank you, Josh.
Yeah, thank you very much, Josh. Thank you for having me on here, and thank you both for what you're doing for all your pilots.
Make sure you subscribe to the channel wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss an episode. If you have comments or suggestions for future episodes, please email us at psacommunications@alpa.org. We look forward to continuing to bring you up-to-date information about matters that affect you and your life as a PSA pilot. On behalf of your PSA Master Executive Council, we thank you for tuning in. Until next time, stay safe and always keep going. Below the line.